Sharby in the newsroom. After the phone hacking scandal that brought down Britain's best-selling Sunday newspaper, News of the World, media mogul Rupert Murdoch turned the tables when he faced the official inquiry into UK media ethics this Wednesday. He firmly denied accusations that he used his media empire to play puppet master. But the damage was done the day before, when son James detailed News Corporation's close ties to the Cameron government. The inquiry examining emails that show how staff of Culture and Sports Minister Jeremy Hunt and a Murdoch Director of Public Affairs kept each other abreast of what was going on. Hunt, whose responsibilities include, by the way, overseeing the upcoming Olympics, now finds himself fighting for his job.
Transcripts of conversations and texts published yesterday between my special advisor Adam Smith.
Now is not the time for knee-jerk reactions. We had evidence presented today that alleged meetings and conversations with me that simply didn't happen, and we need to get to the bottom of that.
Jeremy Hunt should have been standing up for the interests of the British people. In fact, it now turns out he was standing up for the interests of the Murdochs. He should resign.
Now, is all this a passing storm for the UK's Conservative-led government, or will this change politics and media forever across the channel? Also, how the French fare when it comes to reporting politics. We're, after all, in the throes of a presidential election campaign in this country. Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Murdoch's no-surrender stance. And with us to talk about it, Dave Clark of the French news agency AFP. Welcome, sir. Waddock Doyle heads the Global Communications Department at the American University of Paris. Welcome, sir. Jean-Claude Sergent, who teaches at the Sorbonne Nouvelle University and who just told us you're preparing a book on Rupert Murdoch's, will it be called his rise and fall, or would it just be...
Citizen Murdoch, I suppose.
Citizen Murdoch. Okay, that's a working title.
Yes.
All right, and across the channel in London, Claire Enders of Enders Analysis, who knows all when it comes to media companies in the UK and all over the world. Thank you for being with us. The France 24 debate, where you can always weigh in on the conversation on Facebook and on Twitter. You can find us at François F24. So, here we are, one day after those leaked emails with headlines like Murdoch turns tables on Cameron. And in the first of 2 days of questioning under oath by the inquiry presided over by Lord Leveson, 81-year-old Rupert Murdoch promised to clear the air.
There have been some abuses shown. I would say there are many other abuses, but we can all go into that in time. And, you know, the state of media in this country is of absolutely vital interest to all its citizens. So I think, you know, a chance, and frankly, I welcomed the opportunity because I wanted to put certain myths to bed.
Yes. You use the term abuses. Is it your perception or understanding that abuses go further than the issue of phone hacking? Or are they limited to the issue of phone hacking?
I would they go further.
All right, so gripping television, Dave Clark. But did he, as Rupert Murdoch say, put any myths to bed on day one?
Well, he certainly put a myth to bed today about the son's treatment of his own family. Of Gordon Brown's own family. Gordon Brown, the former Prime Minister, attacked the son. And Murdoch did turn the tables on him today. He did say that they received a letter thanking them for their coverage at the time from the Brown family. His testimony in the past 2 days has really served to put the focus back on David Cameron's government and on the British political elite as a whole, all of whom have been in bed with the Murdoch Empire now, going back to Thatcher and even before. And certainly Tony Blair and Gordon Brown were close friends of News International while it lasted, and then bitter enemies afterwards. And now David Cameron is experiencing some of the same problems since apparently the Murdoch Empire don't think he's given them enough support since the scandal broke, and now they are learning that they have a lot of emails left to come out about the close ties between Jeremy Hunt's office and presumably also David Cameron's office with the Murdoch Empire.
Claire Enders, this Leveson Inquiry was named by the current Prime Minister, but there was huge public outcry. Do you agree with Dave Clark that Murdoch and his son have managed to turn the table on the politicians over the past 2 days?
Well, I mean, what they've done is that they've set out to defend their reputations, and in particular, to defend their view that their contacts with politicians are all in the name of business advocacy. I mean, we had James Murdoch talking extensively about business advocacy, and we had today Rupert Murdoch, his father, saying that he had never advanced the commercial objectives of his organizations within the papers, nor sought any favors from politicians, which was quite a breathtaking statement to make. So I think actually that what we're hearing from James and from Rupert Murdoch is a message from Planet Murdoch, where none of their actions are ever inappropriate. And in fact, they seek at all times to uphold the law. Both James Murdoch and Rupert Murdoch have advanced themselves as ethical people, you know, keeping a very high standard of behavior. And yet, bizarrely, you know, yesterday, what we saw was that in the emails that were released, we saw, you know, really an extraordinary, extreme nature to that business advocacy, a way of being in and out of every office in Westminster in pursuit of those commercial interests. Now, obviously, here, many people believe that those emails are a mixture of fact and fantasy, and in fact, that the credibility of Fred Mitchell has been very seriously impugned by the release of those emails. So many people here they say more about Fred Mitchell and indeed about James Murdoch's desire to always hear, you know, self-serving and pleasing anecdotes. But certainly the portrayal of the political life of this country that Fred Mitchell provides in those emails is not one that's consistent with actually what was going on at the back end of 2010. I mean, you know, so I think that we see two different things. We see, A, the Murdochs explaining themselves and sticking to their line like glue. They did nothing wrong. They have always behaved in an above-the-board way in all these years, and which is very important for them to get across, not least because they are the management of the world's biggest media organization. And then on the other hand, we have a picture here of a crisis in the government caused by these very incautious emails of Fred Mitchell's. And in fact, we end up with Jeremy Hunt in the dock for phone hacking allegations and inappropriate conduct that occurred at News International. I mean, you couldn't really quite invent this.
All right, and an aide to Jeremy Hunt, by the way, who's resigned over this. But for now, the man, Hunt, the culture minister, once said in an interview, he's like all good conservatives, a cheerleader for Rupert Murdoch's contribution to the health of British television. For now, he still has a job.
Absolutely clear about the Culture Secretary, who has my full support for the excellent job that he does. The Culture Secretary will be giving a full account of himself in this House of Commons this afternoon and in front of the Leveson Inquiry, and he will give a very good account of himself for this very simple reason, that in judging this important bid, the Culture Secretary sought independent advice from independent regulators at every stage, although he did not need to. And the Culture Secretary took that independent advice at every stage, although he did not need to.
Jean-Claude Sergent, is that, as Claire Enders would say, from Planet Murdoch's script there?
Yes, we've got to remember that at the very beginning, that was in December 2011, we had that bid by Rupert Murdoch to buy the outstanding part of 2010, the outstanding part of BSkyB that he did not own. And this probably would have meant that Jeremy Hunt at the time should have referred the bid, to the Monopolies Commission, which he did not. So the big question here, the second, is that we have a kind of, if not investigation, but at least some kind of questioning being made by Ofcom, the broadcasting regulator, who's got to make sure that the license for BSkyB is currently run by a fit and proper person. So the problem is whether or not Ofcom will, at the end of the day, come up with the clear thinking that BSkyB is in proper and fit hands. So what we now see, I mean, the two things, to say the phone hacking question and the BSkyB file, are converging at some time, and it will be very important to see how Ofcom, in fact, determines whether BSkyB is properly conducted and ruled or not by the Murdoch family.
Warwick Doyle, the Guardian, the newspaper that helped break the phone hacking scandal, said this has the potential to be as big as Watergate because of obviously this phone tapping involved in both instances. Do you agree?
Well, it's not the United States, so executive power can never remove. But it's clearly the evidence that came out yesterday. I just can't see how James Hunt can stay in his position after it's been clear that he tried to interfere with any possible referral to Ofcom and get the decision to himself as minister, and that he intended to give it to it. Plus, he went to New York and met with Sky just before, met with News International, the owners of Murdoch's empire, just before that the News International announced or told Murdoch in private meetings that they were going to support him. They were going to abandon Labour and support the Conservatives. So it's very clear that I find it hard to imagine that Hunt will stay there. And it is mounting towards Cameron. But we'll see. Hunt was predicted to be, the successor to Cameron. He was a rising star of the Conservative Party, so he's going to try and hang on as long as he can. But I think he's in a very difficult position.
Dave Clark?
The fact that it's mounting towards Cameron is probably the reason why Hunt can't go, because if Hunt has to go because he was too close to News International, well, who's having Christmas dinner with the Prime Minister? Who's employing former senior executives from News International in his own office? Who's riding a horse loaned to him by Rebecca Brooks, the former editor of The Sun and the News of the World, which she in turn borrowed from the Metropolitan Police, which in turn failed to investigate the phone hacking allegations, which in turn employed former senior police officers. It's everyone's in it together.
In the Commons, Prime Minister Cameron today saying, we all did too much cozying up to Rupert Murdoch, pointing at the opposition.
Well, this is true, but at the same time, just to follow up on what has been said, we must not forget this is the second time that Cameron is involved in a crisis induced by Rupert Murdoch. If you remember, back in 2007, I think he hired Andy Coulson. Andy Coulson was the editor of the News of the World, who had just resigned over, if not yet phone hacking, at least the behavior of one of the royal correspondent, who was sent to jail for a couple of months. And then Cameron hired him as media advisor, and then he appointed him as a communication head in the government in 2010, and he had in fact to fire him in January 2011. So this is and he was very much blamed for this rather shall I say an unsavory decision of hiring Andy Coulson, who made himself famous through the phone hacking scandal. But getting back to your question, it's something which has always happened. I mean, if you go back over the years, for instance, I mean, if you remember David Lloyd George buying the Daily News, the leading liberal newspaper, with money he had gathered from a special subscription to him. If you remember the 1930s, with the press lords trying to impose their views on the Conservative Party at the time. I mean, it has always been a situation where we have some kind of connivance between politicians and the press, except that when Rupert Murdoch came into Fleet Street, that was back in 1969, he came with a view of clearly becoming, in fact, the king of Fleet Street, the Napoleon of Fleet Street, and he achieved that with the support of the various governments of the day, particularly, in fact, Mrs. Thatcher in 1981, when he managed to buy over the Times and all the Times newspaper, whereas this particular bit should have been referred once again already, in fact, to the Monopolies and Mergers Commission. This was not done. In 1990, when he bought over British satellite broadcasting, that was in 1990, which became afterwards and eventually Sky B. This also should have been referred to a special monopolies commission. This was not done. So he acted completely freely with the support and, in fact, the blessing of the governments of the time.
Claire Enders, I'm listening to Jean-Claude Sergent speak, and it sounds a lot like in 2008 when we discovered that the banking sector wasn't regulated. Are you surprised by any of the developments of the past 24 hours?
Well, no, I'm not. I mean, I have to say I have been following Rupert Murdoch since 1981, so none of this is a surprise. We knew, for instance, of the close links between Alex Salmond and Rupert Murdoch. We knew about his godfatherly duties from Tony Blair. We know a great deal about what Murdoch has been up to all these years in the UK. So I have to say nothing was really of any great surprise. I mean, to begin with, the email trail that was released yesterday was absolutely explosive. If you took those emails at face value, as Ed Miliband did, I think it was really quite a shock. So, I mean, just to dispute a little bit of what Jean-Claude was saying, I mean, the fact is that if you look at the picture since 1981, you can clearly see a pattern where the politicians try to give to Mr. Murdoch, or indeed his son James, a number of concessions, and then they're taken away by the regulators. And what I would say, as someone who is British and who has followed this and who fought against the transaction that we're all talking about, was with all that money and all that influence, James Murdoch and Rupert Murdoch did not pull off any of the grand plan that they had in 2010, whether it was to eliminate Ofcom, to cut down the BBC, or indeed to secure their transaction.
But as Jean-Claude Sergent said, he did pull off the grand plan in 1969 to become the king of Fleet Street. What was different this time, Claire Enders?
Well, I mean, if he had achieved the transaction that would have taken 39% of Sky B to 100% of Sky B, Rupert Murdoch would have greatly added to the scale and scope of the enterprise. I mean, there is no country in Europe that would allow an organization that controls and owns 40% of the daily press to own an organization that is the biggest TV company with almost 40% of all revenue. I mean, there is no precedent for the transaction that they were advancing, and they did take 20 years to fine-tune the legislation to get to the point where they could achieve their ends. I mean, there was the removal in 2003 of the requirement on European ownership, and then, of course, they tried and failed to buy a shareholding in ITV, and that was, in fact, stymied by Alistair Darling. So we have a very long picture of the company trying to achieve its ends, its commercial ends, and getting very, very close. So had the transaction succeeded, there would have been no precedent at all in the world for the scale and scope of this enterprise within this very small market. Right, so you can imagine why it was that I was dead against it.
And when we come back, we'll be taking a look at just where the Murdoch empire now sits. Stay with us.